Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious. With me is the one and only Mr. Nick Thomas, the astronaut wrangler out there at Kennedy Visitors Complex. Nick, how are you?
Good to see you again, Mark.
Good to see you, sir. Nick's become a frequent visitor, usually on Mondays on Stay Curious, where we can talk about space history that he has an interest and perspective on because he's met many of these astronauts of our wonderful American space age. How are you, and how's things out there at the Space Visitors Complex?
Doing very good. Things out at the complex are going quite well. We're approaching what I call the quiet before the storm, and the storm comes after Christmas. It's the 5 days after Christmas when we'll have lots and lots of people out there. But right now we're just kind of steady state. Shows are going real well. We were just working with Wendy Lawrence last week, and we've got Marcos Pontes this week. So things are just tracking along real fine out there.
Brazilian astronaut. Go out there and check him out through Thursday. He's out there. And then you have Mark Brown, I believe, for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, this will be Mark's
weekend.
first appearance with us.
Yeah, he was a commander, wasn't he? Or I'm not up to
Mark
speed on
was
him.
a pilot, as I recall, on this mission.
Okay,
right now.
you're wearing, Leisman Brown, and that's Jim Adamson, DOD mission there.
Yeah, so
You
Mark
won't be able to talk much about that.
Mark was a mission specialist on this.
There you go. There is up there a photograph of the astronaut, it's called the theater, there on the left.
It's the Universe Theater.
All right. Tell us what we're looking at there.
Yeah, we're looking down the road toward the Rocket Garden, and to the left, just in the foreground, is the Milky Way ice cream shop, which is popular even in the winter. And then beyond it is Universe Theater, where we do a number of different presentations. But twice a day in that theater, we do the astronaut encounter, where the astronaut will come in and do a formal presentation, which will include slides and videos and so forth. And at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up to Q&A from the public. So it's a lot of fun there.
A lot of fun. We've been going out there a lot, a group of us here at the American Space Museum. And, of course, the Rocket Garden is there. Just beyond the Rocket Garden, you regulars out there, if you go by there in the next couple of weeks and see the boards up that they're building something behind there.
Yep.
What's going on back there?
That's going to be the new home for the coffee shop, Starbucks.
Yeah, Starbucks. So you can get your $6 cup of coffee there. You know what I found? A $3 cup of coffee up in the playground. Up on
the second floor
of the IMAX Theater.
The Planet Play. They got some good coffee.
Have you been up there?
Yes, I have.
That's a nice little space
really
up
is.
there, and I thought, well, I'm going to go early. These astronaut counters get me a cup of coffee. They also have wine and beer on tap. And I asked the lady when the party started getting going good, and she said sometimes 11 in the morning.
The kids have really taken to Planet Play because it really is an immersive experience. It's really an immersive educational experience, and they get to have fun while they're doing it.
Yeah, it is. And I understand they may add a adult edition to that.
Discussions about that, but I don't know where they stand on that right now.
Well, the decorations are up, and the center's staying open this week. Where you're staying open until 7 o'clock at night.
Correct.
Good.
And we've got a wonderful preponderance of Christmas trees. There by the bus tour entrance, we have 5 Christmas trees alone. We have one in NASA Central, and then we have the big one out in the Rocket Garden. So we are definitely well festooned for the season.
Yeah, we're in the mood for Christmas. I'm going out there tonight to see the Opportunity documentary and see it all lit up. Of course, it's going to be dark at 5:30, so I'm glad they're keeping it open so we can enjoy some of that holiday lights out there, because they do a good job. There's a little rocket on the left there. They dress stuff up. But here's what part of what Nick does is you can get an autograph from an astronaut. There's Wendy Lawrence with Nick and Marty. Hey, Marty, we haven't said hi to you today. How are you?
Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to say hello.
Well, I'm so interested in talking to Nick, you know. You doing good?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thanks.
You were out there today. What astronaut did you see today?
Marcos Pontes,
yeah.
And he was very good. Very personal. Really enjoyed listening to him.
Yeah, from Brazil, and just elected senator, I think, in Brazil. He was in the ministry up there. which I'm, pleasantly surprised that he'd take the time to come here and do another talk. He was just here 3 or 4 months ago, if I recall. So good for him.
Yeah, the astronaut encounter is very important for Marcos because he really believes in the outreach and educational aspect of all this. And also, as you will know, we have a rather large Brazilian population both in Orlando and down in Melbourne. We got all the Embraer people down there in Melbourne. So this time of the year, we see an upturn in our visitation from the folks from Brazil. So this is a great time for Marcos to come down there and do his presentations, meet his friends, and make some new ones.
And he's wonderful guy. He had the only Brazilian to go to space.
So far,
I bought his book and read his book. He's very into STEAM education and the environment and so forth. Brazil's got those rainforests that they're always
and he was their
save.
Minister for Science and Technology for quite a few years.
Exactly. Well, we have Mr. Nick Thomas here to do a program today about a specific astronaut. Let me get that off air. Gene Cernan. Gene Cernan. I'm going to turn it over to Nick here to talk about the last man on the moon, a very interesting astronaut. This is there's Gino there.
Yeah.
There. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're going to talk a little bit about how we honor these astronauts at Spaceview Park and his 2 missions, a daring Gemini mission, and of course Apollo 17, when he became the last human being
And
to
Apollo 10.
And Apollo 10. Yeah, sorry.
So
yeah,
he's a triple threat. You see him getting suited up here for his first space flight, which was Gemini 9 in 1966. During which he performed a spacewalk, and we'll talk about that later because it was a very difficult one.
We have pavers out there at our Gemini Park next to the Indian River. That is our view back here. In fact, the VAB, Marty, why don't you circle the VAB you can see in the distance there. So I always call it like our Devil's Tower to look over my shoulder. And there it is. That's the biggest indoor one-story building in the world. And they'll be reconstructing another Artemis in there, launch soon.
We talked to some of the Artemis folks here last week. Over in Michoud, they are attaching the engine, the 4 core engines to the core stage. They're getting that ready. In the meantime, over here at the Operations Checkout building, we have the Orion spacecraft and also its service module, and those 2 will be mated soon. So we are tagging along fairly nicely for Artemis 2. We expect that sometime after this Artemis 1 mission concludes that we'll hear who the crew is going to be assigned to Artemis 2, and we're all waiting for that one with bated breath.
Yeah. Artemis 1 is dive bombing the moon today on December 6th, coming to a closest approach as it's headed back to Earth on December 11th, this Sunday coming up. And 3 Tacheonauts came back from the Chinese space station today. So busy day in space history, but we're here to talk about the past space history that Nick Thomas and I, being both baby boomers, grew up with the Gemini era. It was so exciting. Every 6 weeks was a mission of 2 men going to space, doing everything we needed to beat the Russians. Let's just don't forget that. We wanted to beat the Russians to the moon. And during this 2 years of Gemini, 10 missions, Nick, I find that, in space history, Russia didn't launch 1 mission during our Gemini.
It was very quiet over there.
They're working on their Soyuz capsule. It failed.
But also at that time, the Russians had pretty much shot their bolt, because when Khrushchev was in charge of the Soviet Union, he was more interested in getting the big propaganda first. First satellite in space, first man in space, first 2 men in space, first woman in space, first 3. And he was going for all these high-profile firsts. While over here, we were marching down a very steady road of engineering progress, one step after the other. It was the tortoise and the hare writ large. And of course, it all came to the conclusion on 20 July 1969 when we landed on the moon.
Sure did. And we're going to talk about next Monday, we're going to talk about Gemini 6 and 7, when Gemini 7 was actually launched from a 2-week mission before Gemini 6 because of a couple of scrubs with some great astronauts. One astronaut became mayor of a launch pad during all
Yes, he
that.
did.
We'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk in 2 weeks about what I think is really the mission that I'll never forget even more than Apollo 11 is Apollo 8, when we circled the moon with 3 men, and all 3 of them are still alive, by the way. That was 1968. So, but we're going to turn the pages back to 1966. Here is the way astronauts looked, and tell us who these people are and what's going on there.
This is our crew from Gemini 9, Commander Tom Stafford on the right, and his pilot Gene Cernan on the left. Now, this picture was taken in the White Room shortly after the first scrub. Now, on this flight, the guys were supposed to rendezvous with an Agena up in orbit, but unfortunately that Agena was lost. I believe it blew up during staging. But it was lost, so that mission was lost for the time being. So the guys got out, and you can see it's kind of an air of, I wouldn't say they're not dejected, but there is an air of resignation there in the White Room. Okay, we lost this one, we'll try again. And then eventually they did try again with what was called the ATDA, the Augmented Targeting Docking Adapter, and which later on became the Angry Alligator of space lore.
Yes, and yeah, very interesting picture of their posture there. Maybe that's Gunter Vent's knee in the foreground.
Gunter's in there somewhere. You can be sure of that.
But we honor our astronauts. Nick knows that. This is a big thing about our American Space Museum. It was founded over 20 years ago with handprints of the astronauts in several locations. Mercury, Gemini Monument is where Geno's is here. You see the 2 on the column there. Mm-hmm. Gene's also out of Apollo. Right. We have him in both places. But there's my hands this morning on top of Gene Cernan's there. Of course, we lost him. I think it's going to be 3 years in December,
now, yeah.
Something like that. So I never got to meet him. He would have been on my bucket list, a guy to talk to. Did you meet him?
Yeah, I had a chance to work with him. We had an Apollo 17 celebration. This was before we started the astronaut encounter program proper. Mm-hmm. But Gino came by and was going and did a speech, and I was assigned to be his escort. And before we started, and before I did his introduction, I asked him, I said, "Is there anything else I need to know?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Keep me moving. If I stop, I'm dead."
Oh, really?
So when you finished that presentation, you had to move quickly but politely through the crowd and get out of there. Otherwise, you were going to be tied up for a long time.
Oh, I got you there. Well, I've had the good luck to be around Harrison Schmidt a couple times at the University of Tennessee, and he said Gino gave him a great tip: never pass a restroom.
Yeah. Well, don't
ever pass a restroom. Make an excuse to go in because you're going to be caught up with people and you're going to have to pee so bad.
That advice goes back from Lyndon Johnson to Alan Shepard when they were going down Constitution Avenue for the big parade after Freedom 7. And Lyndon Johnson told the Shepard, he said, you're a famous man now. He says, let me give you a little advice now that you're a famous person. In the years ahead, never give up, never pass up the opportunity for a free lunch or to go to the bathroom.
Free lunch.
And he actually used more saltier language than that, but that's, I think we can get past with that on a podcast.
Think about it. These people's time is just so... Nick's going to tell us a little bit about something that's recreated out there at the Kennedy Visitors Complex at the Hall of Fame, the Boeing Hall of Fame, if they ever want to throw some money our way. They do a visual, Gemini 9 is out there in the Hall of Fame. That's right when you walk in, that building on the left, with all the Mercury astronauts on the wall. And they do a video about this spacewalk, and I will have Nick tell you about it here, how important it was and what happened.
This is known as the spacewalk from hell, and I think Gene Cernan himself gave it that name in his autobiography. His job, as you can see this artist rendering here, his job was going to be to leave the spacecraft and make his way back to the rear of the adapter section, where he was going to get into a contraption called the AMU, the Astronaut Maneuvering Unit. Now, this was actually an Air Force experiment, And his job was to get in there and buckle onto that thing and then fly tethered around the Gemini spacecraft. He was going to have a braided cable holding him to the spacecraft while he made the run with this AMU. This was only our second spacewalk after Gemini 4. And of course, Gemini 4, Ed White made it look so easy because there wasn't anything for him to do in the way of tasks out there. There was no understanding at this time of the need for handholds, footholds, tether restraints, and so forth. So Gino was left to his own devices to go out there and get inside this AMU backpack. And along with getting into the backpack, he also had to change over his O2 supply from his EVA tether to the O2 supply that was included in the AMU, and he also had to hook up electrical and telemetry connections. So trying to do all this while trying to get clamped into this backpack was very, very difficult. And as you've probably read in Gino's biography, he worked up a hell of a sweat during this whole thing. You know, just trying to maintain your position is a job of work out there. And when you're trying to do it without handholds or footholds, it becomes all but impossible. So he worked himself up into such a lather that he fogged up his faceplate. And Tom Stafford inside the spacecraft could hear Gino's exertions out there. And Tom finally made the call that we're going to terminate the EVA. There's just nothing to be gained here. Now with his visor fogged up, if he could get into the AMU and pull away from the spacecraft, he couldn't see where it was going. So the decision was made to go ahead and pack it in and come back into the spacecraft. Now, the result of this was unfortunate because after that flight, some people, both in management and the astronaut office, came to believe that Gino had had too much of a cavalier attitude about this EVA, and that's just not true. Gino, on this EVA, he was overtasked and undertrained. And the management and the trainers, in my mind, had totally underestimated the job of doing an EVA and not understanding the need for the handholds and the footholds that we now take for common, that we take for granted. So I think in some levels of management and also in the astronaut office, Gene got a bad rap for that spacewalk. He was simply put into an impossible position. He was just put into a position where he simply couldn't win, and he did his best. But that was as I say, the spacewalk from hell. This picture we have up on screen now was a snapshot that Gino got of the Gemini spacecraft during this EVA, and it's remarkable to see that he did get some distance away from the spacecraft to take this picture. Not framed, perhaps not focused, but who cares? It's a shot of a spacecraft in space, and it's just breathtaking as it is.
Yeah, he's got to be 30 feet away.
A good distance away, and he had to pull himself back by his tether to get back.
And
to the
they made
spacecraft.
it back safely.
Oh, you can see the look of relief on Gene's face from here, because that getting back into that spacecraft in that suit and with all that falderall of the tether and so forth to get back in there, he literally had to jackknife himself into this tight position so they could close the hatch, and they got the hatch closed, and Gino's all cramped up. He says, "Tom, if we can't repressurize the spacecraft, I am gonna die." So they finally got the vehicle repressurized, and he could depress the suit, could take off the helmet and the gloves. But right there in that picture, you can see Gino's relief all the way over here. It was a long, long day out there in space when he was trying to do that spacewalk.
It was a very daring moment that even in some of the literature, the General Tom Stafford talks about going through his head the procedures of having to cut him loose and let him float away from and come back by yourself.
The famous conference that General Stafford had with Deep Slate in the White Room. Gino saw the two go off to the side and have a very quiet conversation together, and it came to pass later on that conversation was reminding Tom that if Gino became incapacitated and we could not get him back in the spacecraft, he was going to have to be cut loose, the hatch was going to have to be closed, and Tom would have to come home alone.
Yeah. These were real possibilities back then in the pioneering days of these astronauts going into the unknown. Every space flight was a complete unknown of different things, but you know what I'm impressed with is how the vehicle matured, and the fuel cells came online from battery power, and all these things that were the engineering marvels that we need to accomplish to go to the moon that President Kennedy talked about we're going to the moon. We don't even know what we're going to have to invent along the way.
Gemini was a pure engineering developmental flight test program in that we were testing all the techniques and technologies that we were going to need to get to the moon during the Apollo program. Some people think of Gemini as being the unsung program. I think it's very sung.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was a remarkable program, and all of us as young people who were paying attention to it at the time knew what these steps were all about.
It was so hard in the 60s to find information about this, all right? I talk about the Twitter of 65 and 66 was AM radio, because at the top and bottom of the hour in some stations, every 20 minutes, they would give you news, and that was the only way you'd know if this spacewalk was going on or not.
But on the other hand, on television, you had people like Walter Cronkite out there, and I've said this before, Cronkite did such a great job of speaking up to the people and bringing them along in this journey, teaching them the technology, teaching them about orbital rendezvous mechanics. So Cronkite you had there is really the gold standard of broadcasters when it came to the space program.
Absolutely. Who are the principals here, Nick Thomas?
Yeah. This is the backup crew for Apollo 14. Gino is a commander you can see to the left, and then his LEM pilot, Joe Engel, and then his command module pilot, Ron Evans. But alongside of Gino is a remarkable young woman that we both have had the chance to meet, and that is Dee O'Hara, the astronaut's nurse.
That's right. What a wonderful lady she is. She's in her late 80s, still does some tours around there.
Yeah.
We didn't throw a slide in there of Apollo 10. We'll talk about that in a second. But before we go away from this, yes, you see the astronaut in the middle was going to be the moonwalker with Cernan, Joe Engel, X-15 pilot, and he was bumped for a true geologist to go to the moon. It trained them in geology, Harrison Schmitt.
Now, by Apollo 14, we knew that 18, 19, and 20 were going to be dumped. So on 18, Dick Gordon's crew, his LEM pilot was Jack Schmitt. Well, management started to say, well, we got to get the geologist on the moon, certainly by the last mission. So the debate started, should we replace the 17 crew with Dick and his crew that included Jack, or should we take Jack off that crew and put it on Gino's crew and bump Joe Engel? So the final decision was made to bump Joe Henry and to bring Jack Schmitt on. Gino, of course, as commander, protested the decision, and Gino was pretty much given the proposition that Jim Lovell was given on Apollo 13. You either fly with this backup crew member, or the whole backup crew will change out with your crew. So there you had the decision, and the decision was made, and Jack Schmitt flew to the moon. Now, everybody talks about Jack being a geologist, Dr. Rock, and so forth, but Jack Schmitt was one of the best pilots of that T-38 when these scientists were trained to fly the T-38. When they got their I'm trying to remember what the term was, but they're training the T-38, and Schmitt was a natural. And also, as in his job as lunar module pilot, which is really flight systems engineer, he also did excellent work. So, unfortunate for Joe Engel, who of course was a fine pilot, but the decision was made to swap out with Jack Schmitt, and in the end, it was the right decision.
It did pay off. They did some great geology. We're going to talk about that 50 years ago, the last landing on the moon, as we're talking Artemis and going back to the moon and so forth. 50 years, Nick, that's half a century.
Yeah.
You and I have been around that long, buddy.
The clock's running.
The clock's running. We don't have a picture of the mission, but let's just say this could be the rocket on the pad. You've got to. Where's the? You got to talk a minute about. Where does Saturn V go? There's Apollo 17 and there's Saturn V on the moon. Got to talk about maybe the first cuss words uttered on an open mic on Apollo 10 that orbited the moon but didn't land.
Uttered by Gene Cernan at the time of staging, when the ascent stage separated from the descent stage and started its routine to re-rendezvous with Charlie Brown in lunar orbit. And the separation occurred, but then the lunar module ascent stage went into a wild gyration. And the first words on an open mic that were not Emily Post were made by Gene Cernan, and those words were "son of a bitch."
Yeah.
And they were off to the races. And this thing, what had happened was a switch had been overlooked, and the LEM went into a mode whereby it was searching for the command service module. And instead of tilting its radar, the radar stayed still, and the spacecraft tried to center in on the radar beam for the CSM. They got the vehicle back under control and obviously made a successful and a safe rendezvous and docking. This was another, I'll call it a dent in Gene Cernan's armor, in that switch that was overlooked was on Gino's side. Mm-hmm. And as LEM pilot or systems engineer, Gino was responsible for getting those switches set. But Tom Stafford, being the penultimate commander, Tom Stafford says, "I'm the commander, it's my fault, it's my responsibility." And that's where the discussion ended. But again, there were people in the office who thought that maybe Gino was not as focused as he could be on what needed to be done. This would come up again. But again, like I say, Tom Stafford was a guy who stood forward and said, "Hey, it's my responsibility. Any questions?" And that was the end of the discussion.
General Tom Stafford's 92 years old.
Bless his heart, absolutely.
Bless his heart. And Marty Winkle there, who we have watching today, and you told me, Marty, how many switches are in that lunar module that you were inside of every one of them? Yeah, he'll get over there and tell us. He's handing me our list of our friends watching us today. Gary Gerald, peanut farmer in Georgia there. William Whiting is up in Michigan. Mark Usiak in Pennsylvania. Carlton Bailey's got up from his nap.
Carlton
there,
Bailey.
So thank you. Marty, we're back to the lunar module that you were a Grumman electrical engineer on. And golly, they missed one switch. And how many were there?
There were 300 switches, circuit breakers, meters, readouts. About 300.
Yeah. So
doggone,
we missed one.
Yeah. Now, in further discussion, further investigation, further debrief, Stafford said that he did look across at that panel and see that switch, but from his angle, the parallax, what they call the parallax view, which is kind of from the line of sight, looks a little deceiving. He thought it was in one position when it was in another. So that was a point where he took responsibility.
When you think of flipping those switches, folks, you got to think about, you got a big glove on your hand too.
Yeah. And some of those switches are locking lever switches, which means you have to pull the switch back, move it to the other position, and let it spring forward into its relock position.
Yeah. Read off a couple names of some Stay Curious fans joining us at the beginning of the week.
Well, let's see, we mentioned Carlton Bailey, Steve Hammer, Tom Usiak, Ed Ruskowski, Tom Celentano, let's see, Ben Husett, let's see, I'm not going to, you can read that one.
Something, a TV thing out
Del Vonte, Robert Law.
Robert Law's in Dundee, Scotland.
Doug Forrest was with us, Jerry Swanson, Cynthia Rossi, Paul Forster, and Larry Puskar.
Yeah, so, Larry Puskar there.
Welcome aboard, everyone.
Cliff Watson, my stargazing friend in Pomona, Australia, is where Cliff's at.
That's great.
People watching around the world today, hope you're enjoying the conversation with Mr. Nick Thomas. We are so pleased that he wants to be involved with our museum, and you've been around our museum now a little bit. Tell them a little bit about what you think of what we have here.
Well, I'm just awestruck by the memorabilia that you have here, some of the hardware that people come in and they see it. For instance, the mock-up of the firing room in the back room there, and people see all these, I'll call them steam gauges and switches and so forth, and they say, God, you could probably do all this on a smartphone. Well, in point of fact, your smartphone probably have hundreds of times the memory that those blockhouses had back in those days. And again, with the memorabilia that you have of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, your salute to the women of space, which I really enjoy.
Yes, we
have Kathy Thornton's flight suit in there. And I think it just covers such a wide range of memories for me to come here and see these displays, and brings back good memories for me. And for the young people, it wakes them up to the fact that, it was not all beer and Skittles back in those days. There was a lot of hard work done on slide rules. And it just impresses upon them that they truly stand on the shoulders of giants, even when they're using their smartphone, because that's
Yeah,
technology that was derived from
absolutely.
the
We got
things
rotary phone in the
brought
room
forward.
next door
Yeah.
there that people, some if they're young, they don't know anything about it. And you know, Nick, if you're under 22 years old or younger, you've never breathed a breath on Earth that somebody wasn't breathing a breath orbiting Earth. Isn't that a
Absolutely.
neat thought?
We've had people in space now consecutively for 22 years now. I think it's a wonderful tribute to the men and women of the past, not only the pilots, but also the ground controllers, training teams, and so forth. All the people who, through their efforts, have made this possible for all of us.
Thank you, Nick, for that comment there in our museum and stuff. We hope to see you in our museum here over the holidays. We are a different experience. We kind of a space cave-ish in a way, but we appreciate those people that do find us and enjoy us here. Nick Thomas, take us to the moon on Apollo 17, 50 years ago. That mighty Saturn V rocket was launched in the dark.
Remarkable.
Marty remembers it well. The only night launch, and we're gonna relive a little of that.
A remarkable night on that December 7th of 1972. We were scheduled to go shortly after 9 p.m., but due to a pressurization problem, I believe in the third stage, that was hooked up to the ground launch sequencer, that signal was not tagging up properly. That caused a delay that caused us to launch close to midnight that night. And as I say, just like with the Space Launch System, it was a sunrise in a second and a half when you saw this vehicle just light up the horizon and then go blazing off into the night. This picture,
compare the now. Let's don't make any. You were a teenager like me back in the time, and your dad brought you down here. You grew up
across
in
the river.
Daytona.
I was 12 miles away in Titusville watching that launch. Dad brought me down here for every Saturn V launch, starting with Apollo 8.
Wow.
So I'm lucky to have all that in my memory box. This one, as I say, to see the sunrise in a second and a half and a light so bright that you could read by it, it was just breathtaking. And it was a great end to the lunar landing program, that launch of Apollo 17.
Compare the two, the Artemis launch.
Well,
build the largest rocket we saw 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago.
Just going on memory alone, I can remember that the Saturn V rose very, very slowly. It took about 14 seconds for the Saturn V to clear the top of the tower. The SLS with those two solid rocket boosters cleared it a lot quicker. So when I went back to the computer after launch, I sent out a burst to the astronauts, and I said, faster than a Saturn V, slower than a space shuttle, and it was. The Saturn V of Apollo 17, we could see that going all the way down range. We could clearly see the smoke from the staging of first stage to the second stage. For the SLS, again, those two blazing solid rocket boosters fell away in the most beautiful fashion.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Wendy Lawrence about it, and she noted that, there seemed to be a lot more bleed off from those solid rocket boosters than there were during the shuttle time. Shuttle time, when you let go of them, they were pretty much petered out. But these two boosters still had a little bit of oomph going for them. And I told Wendy, I said, maybe we didn't need that fifth segment after all.
Yeah.
But after the solids dropped off the SLS, you could still clearly see the four core engines as they headed over the hill.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely breathtaking. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I did not take a camera to that event. I wanted to record the whole thing with my mind. And that image is just, not to use a phrase, but it's burned into my memory. It's just something you don't forget. And the sound, as I say, it was literally a sound never heard by human ears before.
There you go. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. And we talked about that last time you were on here about putting your camera down and just enjoying that memory.
Absolutely.
And that you made an impression on me about that, Nick. And I'm trying to develop how we could talk about that in a deeper way, because I think myself included, I get too wrapped up in the photograph instead of like the experience.
Well, it's a perfectly understandable thing in that we're all tourists at one time or another. Our first inclination is to grab a memory. But with something like this, that is, to take a picture of a castle on the Rhine is one thing. But when you're watching something like this, that's going to take off and as soon as going to be gone, and is not to be seen again until the next launch. That's the time when, you need to put down the camera. You need to use the old Mark I standard issue eyeball and just drink that whole experience in, because you've taken so much more than you think you're capable of.
Well, there is the crew of Apollo 17 50 years ago. Only Harrison Schmitt is with us. Everybody that's talked about Mr. Ron Evans up there in the right hand always says what a good guy he is.
I had the pleasure of making Ron's acquaintance when he came to the Visitors Complex several years ago with a group of Japanese VIPs. And as he had turned them loose into the gift shop, I had a chance to talk to him for a while. And a lot of what we talked about was the experience of seeing and living the Saturn V on the launch pad on launch day or a launch night. Now, we've heard the stories about Saturn V and about Space Shuttle, how she is a living, breathing creature out there. The gases are expanding and metal is contracting and icicles are falling down from the stack, and it's just a remarkable experience. But Ron put that whole experience into a context for me that I have never forgotten. He said that Saturn V, when it was on the pad getting ready to go, he said that Saturn V was like a dragon on a leash. And that's the memory I've always carried with me whenever I think of the Saturn V on the pad prior to launch.
Well, imagine you're out at Kennedy Visitors Complex on the bus tour in 1972. And you see this scene.
Yeah, I tell people when they see this picture, they're very surprised. And I say, we were faking a moon landing that day and the tourists caught us.
Right.
But actually what happened here is just out of view there behind the training building, we had an area called the rock pile, which was a simulation of the moonscape with rocks and sand and so forth. And the guys would go out there in practice suits and practice gathering samples and setting up experiments and so forth. So all of our equipment was based at the flight crew training building, which would be off to the left in this picture. But they're getting ready for one of those runs, and they came out, and Gino was parked there getting ready to go out to the rock pile. I guess they were waiting for Jack to get in the rover. But two of our tour buses came by, and people got a view of a lifetime. And if there's anybody out there who was on any of those buses and you still have your Polaroid snapshots of this event, send them to us, because we'd like to put them on screen. That just must have been a remarkable moment.
He's waving there.
But this is how close the public could get to these training sessions, and it really is breathtaking.
That'd be something to see him rehearsing out there on the rock pile. And there's the real thing.
There's the real thing. There's the lunar rover there in the foreground. One of the beautiful mountains of Taurus Littrow in the back, and I would venture to guess that was a mountain they flew over on final approach, which was a real gut thumper, as Gino talks about it in his
how do we know for sure that's Gene and not Harrison?
Well,
Jack
Gino,
Schmitt?
you can see on his right arm there, he has a red band around his elbow and a red band up on the center of his helmet. So the commander wore red bands and the LEM pilot wore none.
They didn't have that on 11 and 12.
No, they didn't have that. It's interesting, but also at this time, we were using the new modified suits, and we started using those suits on Apollo 14. And that's where you saw, for instance, you'll see that the NASA patch is on the right shoulder instead of on the chest. And you'll see these stripes on those second-generation lunar EVA suits.
They continued that striping for the EVAs of the ISS, so they could tell which astronauts which on there. There's Gene in space.
That is I can't tell if that's outward bound or coming back home, but I would almost guess that it is outward bound to the moon, just from the look on Gino's face. Al Worden said that going to the moon, you were focused. There are a lot of things that had to be done, both with the CSM and with the LEM. You're doing a lot of checkouts, so everybody's very busy. Coming back home, Al said, was a little more of a relaxed atmosphere. So just judging by the look on Cernan's face, I would guess it would be heading out to the moon. Marty, you have something on that for us?
Well, he looks a little bit too clean-shaven to be on his way back.
Too. But you'll notice, too, in that post-flight press con that Gino and Jack did, and I think we might have that coming up later on, is that while Jack is very scruffy and almost looking like a nomad from the desert, Gino's pretty clean shaven, and Gino always had an eye for the PR. I think he was a very eloquent man, And I'll tell you, from the standpoint of PR, the last guy on the moon, you had the perfect pick right there because he was able to encapsulate that entire experience and share it in such a way that everybody on Earth felt a part of it.
Yeah, he
And
did.
that was not unimportant.
And there was a documentary a couple years before he died that's
Yeah.
really a good one that he just talks casually about it, kind of out of the fence post on his property type of thing. With his a couple of his less than stellar performances there, why do you think that he got the last mission on the moon?
Well, as I say, it was a sense that of what some people in management and the astronaut office had about Gino's ability. That's not to say that that sense was right, okay? But between Gemini 9 spacewalk and the tumbling of the ascent stage with Apollo 10, that gave some people pause to considering Gene's judgment. In fact, Jim McDivitt, who we were talking about not too long ago, Jim McDivitt said that if Gino gets Apollo 17, he was going to quit as program manager, and he did. The last mission that Jim oversaw as Apollo program manager was Apollo 16. So a lot of people
Why
felt
was that?
Jim was especially concerned about that helicopter crash that Gino had when he was back up on Apollo 14. Now, 2 stories on that helicopter crash. I don't know which one is true. I don't know if both of them are true, but they are both hilarious. One story has it that after the crash, Gino came back to the operations and
Well,
checked.
you got to tell us about why he was flying a helicopter.
He was
what
flying
he was looking
low,
at, and what.
and
crashed.
he was flat hatting. Now, a lot of people say he was looking at girls in bikinis. I don't see a lot of bikinis on the edges of the Indian River, so I
Right.
kind of discount that. I think that's kind of an
Just
urban
just
legend
a little
about it.
north of it there, maybe.
But
The beach.
nevertheless, Gino was flat hatting along the Indian River, and the sun angles, the beta angles, were such that he didn't have proper depth perception, and he couldn't see just how high those waves or riplets were in the river. And his skids got caught in that water, and that helicopter literally went ass over tea kettle into the water.
Wow.
The fuel tank exploded. Gino had to swim below the flame to get out from under it, and he was actually rescued by a little old lady in a fishing boat.
My gosh.
So Gino gets out of there. They get him back to the operations and checkout building on the Space Center. And one story is that Gino's walking down the hall in this soaking wet flight suit. And Alan Shepard is in a conference room talking to some of the guys. And Gino ducks his head in the conference room and he says, "Okay, Al, you win. It's your mission." The other story that I heard was that Gino was in the dispensary getting patched up because he had a cut over his eye and a couple of bruises. And while he's there getting fixed up, Alan Shepard comes in, sticks his head in, looks at Cernan, and he says, "That was a silly-ass thing to do," and he storms off. And Gino talked about that. He said, "Here I was, just having escaped from a crash that could have killed me, and Alan Shepard is telling me how it spoiled his day." So I don't know which or if both stories are true, but they're both good stories.
The helicopter actual crash, though, that is
Yes,
true.
it did.
The whole
And
event there. And
so
that's in his book. He talks about
that
it.
was the thing
in
that
his book.
Jim McDivitt held against Gino. He said that's poor judgment, clear and simple, and there's just no way that you want a guy like that on the controls of that limb coming down
Just
to the
think
moon.
about that. When they have a little bit of fun and it gets out of control, and all of a sudden your whole career could be in jeopardy. there.
Absolutely.
Recently, we had on our auction this pair of dice that Gene took to the moon, sold for about $350, I think. One of the little things you don't think about, and I kind of threw it in there because when was the last time you saw a good pair of dice?
Oh,
You know, I mean, well, there's casinos flopping up all over the place. They don't see my money, but anyway, just an idea of some of the things that people took to
think
the
about
moon, and
think about shooting dice in 0G.
yeah, that'd be fun, wouldn't it? That'd be fun. So, take us out here with the man on the moon.
Just magnificent. I mean, this just says it all about the end of the lunar landing program. You got the piece of the LRV there on the right. You got the American flag in the background, and Gino there, square center. To us, as we were kids watching this program come to an end, it was a bittersweet moment. We knew that these lunar landings were coming to an end, but we saw all kinds of countless possibilities ahead of us, space stations and things of that nature. But those last pictures of Cernan and Schmidt on the moon, I think they really are the period at the end of the sentence. They really tell the story that, yeah, we said we were going to do this. We did it. We did it 6 times. And there you have the story.
And bringing back fabulous images like this that we might have from Orion as it comes within 60 miles of the moon
Closest
today.
point of approach today.
Yep, we'll be seeing that. And yes, they brought back almost 1,000 pounds, a little over 950 pounds of rock. And they all weren't like gray coal like you think the moon is up in the sky
They're
tonight.
all very distinctive.
Very distinctive, just like everywhere. Look at this anthracite is what that's caused with those specks in there of lava.
It's almost like low grade pyrites, like fool's gold.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's Gene, the LM number 12, correct, Marty?
Marty spacecraft in the background there, and Gene
module.
Cernan and the American flag in the foreground.
And one of the underrated engineering things is the car, the rover. I think if we just put fresh batteries in, you could probably drive them 50 years
Well, it was
later,
a crashed program that was successful in just under a year and a half to develop that lunar roving vehicle. And even though there were some minor problems with it on the surface of the moon on a couple of occasions, the guys were able to do the workarounds and get it to work properly, and it never failed us.
Never did. Never left them anywhere. They went as far as 6 miles away from the lunar module where they couldn't see it anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't care. I would still want to see it no matter where I was.
I want to be able to look over my shoulder. I want to be able to see that spacecraft.
Of course, they wouldn't go any further than the oxygen in their suit would allow them to walk back, maybe.
Yeah.
So Marty, Marty's going to bring us over here a couple other people watching the show today. We're going to do Apollo 17, more info throughout the week. Daniel DeYoung, an airline pilot, he was in Cosmosphere last week.
Oh, great.
Love to see some of his pictures. And M.A. Gailey Rowell, thank you for staying curious with us today. Tomorrow, we've got Gary Allgaier with us. Gary Allgaier was a NASA engineer. You know Gary Allgaier at all? He worked on the... we're going to talk about the Apollo, kind of the steps of things. Yeah. He also worked on the shuttle, but he worked on the docking hatch there. Yeah, we're going to do a whole show. We're going to do 2 shows with Gary. One's just going to be on the docking adapter, which is very fascinating. So Gary Allgaier tomorrow. And we've got another Apollo veteran on Thursday. Marty, who's that? Darnell? Up there. Anyway, we're getting a lot of people interviewed here for the end of the year. And but we're going to talk about Apollo 17 on a couple days here. So right. Marty can't read my handwriting, I know. Interestingly enough, what?
Should be Daryl Higginbotham.
Okay, all right. And he was an Apollo guy?
No, shuttle.
Oh, shuttle, okay.
No, sorry. He started back in the Mercury days, prior to Mercury, working through the shuttle program.
Well, we're getting people who met at the rocket reunion in here and tell their story a little bit because we love hearing your stories. I consider Marty Winkle and all these other people that worked in the programs as national treasures.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
They've done things that nobody else can do. And like Terry White, I guess they'll be on Stay Curious next week. The astronauts consider the space workers their heroes.
And again, Wendy and I were talking about this last week, and you talk to the men and women who work for the program, whether it be for Shuttle, Apollo, Mercury, Gemini, Skylab, whatever, and you talk to them and you thank them for their accomplishments and their hard work, and they all say the same thing. Hey, I was just doing my job.
Yeah.
They are literally the greatest generation when it comes to spaceflight.
It's awesome.
Remarkable national treasure.
And I still say, to get your pink slip and have 3 flawless shuttle missions after you know you're going to be fired the next month, is some integrity and standards that you don't see in many industries.
Mike Leinbach was the launch director for the very last shuttle flight, STS-135, and 3 weeks before the launch, they did the terminal countdown demonstration test, which is a dress rehearsal of the countdown and launch. And before they started the TCDT, Mike got on circuit and he talked to his launch team, realizing that these guys were looking at unemployment in the next few weeks, so that this vehicle's off the ground, they're all going to get pink slips. And he gave them such an incredible, rousing talk. And he basically said, you know something, we know tough times are coming, but we're professionals. Let's go out and make this one our best. And they did.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome. And good to you, Mike Leinbach. He does a tour, a director's tour, twice a month. I took that tour.
Yeah.
He's awesome. He wants you to ask questions. I learned a lot.
He came by and visited Wendy while she was here.
Oh, did he? Wendy Lawrence, we're talking about.
He was the launch director on her last flight, STS-114, so it was a great
of course
reunion.
He was. Yeah, I bet there's a good reunion. Yeah, he's. What we have was showing up here is the last photograph of a human being on the surface of another alien world. Gino, before he ascended the ladder and stowed the camera one last time, took this picture of himself at the Taurus Littrow landing site of the moon. When you look at the full moon coming up tonight, is sort of right center. To look in the center of the moon and go at about 2 o'clock, about halfway through the moon, and that's where Taurus Littrow is. You hang around with me, and the moon's up. I'll show you where all those landing sites are.
I can't remember which flight it was. It may have been Apollo 17, but one of the astronauts, in looking at the mountains of the moon, he quoted the biblical phrase that said, I look to the mountains from whence cometh my strength. And that says it all for this picture right here. This remarkable image of what we were able to accomplish in a very short period of time in terms of human history.
Shadow of a human being there. We did it within 10 years of President Kennedy stating the goal, and we can never forget we lost 3 great men during that. And though we were down 18 months, we still did it twice. We doubled down on it.
We did it. We did it ahead of schedule, and we did it while we were fighting a war.
That's right, and fighting the Vietnam War, as well as very serious unrest in our civil rights movement in America.
Incidentally, on that point, Ron Evans, our command module pilot on 17, Ron was a carrier fighter pilot during the Vietnam War, so Ron was the only Vietnam veteran ever to go to the moon.
Is that right? Yeah. I did not know that.
And that was what made relations between he and Gene very simpatico, because Gino was a carrier pilot too. He was not a test pilot, he was a carrier pilot. And that was another objection some people had. They felt that anyone who commanded a lunar landing mission had to be a test pilot. But
well, Nick Thomas, thank you for your personal memories and historical memories of Mr. Gene Cernan, certainly one of the greatest astronauts, completely underrated in many ways of how his communication skills were really good, like we've talked about, and afterwards really carried the torch for going back to the moon.
You really did. He and Neil Armstrong going to Capitol Hill and making that point that this country cannot stop in its efforts to explore and to move forward. And he and Neil were just the perfect people to have, because they were both so eloquent and so heartfelt about how they saw this goal. And they really, really made the point and made it very, very well. And in fact, a lot of the reason that Orion is passing the moon now and on its way, coming back home, a lot of that was because of the efforts of people like Gene Cernan and Neil Armstrong. And I hope the crew of Artemis 2 remembers that too when they orbit the moon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can't wait for them to be announced. Mr. Nick Thomas, we certainly enjoy you on another wonderful Stay Curious. We went to the moon, but many people will say we actually discovered the Earth on the way there, as this is one of the most publicized pictures you'll ever see of the Earth, taken by Gene or Jack on Apollo 17. There you see Antarctica at the bottom in Africa.
Mike Collins made a very important point that comes up with this photograph. He said that the whole idea of Project Apollo was that we as a species had the option of either staying or leaving. He said, what was Apollo all about? It was about leaving.
Exactly. And that's what the new generation wants, is to colonize Mars. We know we have to expand our resources as a species, and we're making this strides here in the 21st century to do that. So, Nick Thomas, thank you so much, sir. Always enlightening. I know you all out there enjoyed these wonderful stories from a great guy. And we appreciate all that you do to share what our museum is about with the people out there at the visitors complex.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. We'll probably see you out there wrangling up some astronauts later in the week there. So, Marty, anything we need to say to our fans out there and friends?
Nope, we're good.
All right. Thank you, Marty. Yep, we are going to get Marty to talk about that guillotine that separated those two stages of the lunar module and on the moon. 50 years ago, we were on the moon, and we're going back. We will show you some pictures tomorrow of the moon surface from the Orion spacecraft. We're also going to have Gary Allgaier with us, a NASA engineer. He's got some great stories and some really detailed things to share with us tomorrow. So on behalf of our wonderful museum, led by Karan, Conklin, our executive director, I'm Mark Marquette saying we can't wait to see you again tomorrow to bridge the space between us.